Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yes, it brings me great pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Ekant Veer. Ekant is a marketing lecturer at the University of Canterbury, and he comes all the way from the University of Bath in the UK. Now, as a consequence of his renowned speaking skill, he holds numerous Lecturer of the Year awards and teaching awards. He's interested in using marketing technology and advertising to encourage social change. Some of Ekant's research has been published in a number of international journals and used in conjunction with the World Health Organization and government bodies. Ekant's speech tonight is titled, How to Cause Trouble Without Getting in Too Much Trouble. His estimated time will be 10 to 15 minutes. So please give a very big hand for the sometimes controversial but ever insightful Ekant Veer.
Thank you very much, Bailey and Elizabeth. Thanks for having me and Nick for organising this. Kia ora hoa mā, ko eka me takawangoa he ka mahi e te kōrero umanga. Ko Ngāti Inio, ko Jata Hapu, ko Kanihi te awa, ko Himari te mangapai, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hey, thanks for having me, team. As Bailey said and Elizabeth said, my name is Ekant Veer. I'm a professor of marketing here at UC. And Nick and I had a chat a couple of weeks ago about what sort of topics he reckons I should do. And we came up with this one on how to cause trouble without getting into too much trouble. And I've told a few people about this topic, and they've all said unanimously, that's a terrible topic for you. You get into a ton of trouble. I mean, why would you be talking about a topic like this? And typically it's because you can learn from my failures and my mistakes, I think, more than how to actually do it. But also there's that word too is very important. How do you get into trouble? How do you cause trouble without getting into too much trouble? In that I still have a job, I'm still alive, I've caused plenty of trouble, but not too much trouble. I'm going to share my screen with you and we'll go through a couple of slides if that's okay. If at any point you've got any questions, type them in the chat and maybe at the end we can have a bit of Q&A as well. But I will try my best to stick to time the best I can. So let's go to this one. When Nick was asking for some photos as well, he said, we want something that's not your typical academic photo. And I absolutely love this photo. This is a photo that I love. My wife took this photo and she's listening in as well. And it just has this array of beers in front of me. That was my lunch that day in Oamaru. And I want to talk about this topic of not getting into too much trouble. And so when I started researching this idea of why do I cause trouble or why do people cause trouble, I did what every person does these days. And I stuck it in Google and said, why do I cause trouble? Or why do people cause trouble? And I came across these horrible inspirational quotes that seem to be the predominant norm for a lot of people. And I put a couple up here because I typically don't like these inspirational posters. But this one says, one of the basic causes for all the trouble in the world today is that people talk too much and think too little. They act impulsively without thinking. So if you're a troublemaker, it's probably because you're stupid and you say too much. And so already I'm feeling quite attacked. And then this one, which I quite like, psychoanalysts believe that the only normal people are those who cause no trouble, either to themselves or anyone else. So not only am I stupid and talk too much, I'm also abnormal. So already I'm feeling like I am well on the way to really feeling good about myself after doing some research on why I cause trouble. But the reality is there's a reason that I like to speak out on topics which I think are important. And I'm going to use this quote from Edmund Burke, which I'm sure most of you have heard before. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Now, this is a problematic quote in many ways. I think it assumes a level of objectivity and morality, that there is a definite good and a definite evil. And obviously, because women clearly can't do anything, it's only the men. This is obviously written in a different time. But the idea is that if you want to succeed, if you want to overcome some of the bad things going on in life, then you really only need to step back and do nothing, and then evil will take over. I think that stems, that is the heart of a lot of the times why I speak out, because I do feel that I have privilege. I have had a very privileged upbringing. I have been educated. I have lived in some amazing parts of the world. I have learned a lot. And I also think there's injustice in the world. I think there are people who are downtrodden, who don't have the same privilege. And so it's beholden on me to actually say something about this at times. And sometimes when you stand up and you say something about what's happening in the world, it does cause trouble. It doesn't necessarily cause just trouble for you. It causes trouble for the power structures who maybe have caused that injustice. And that's okay. It's okay to speak out on those things. But you also need to be protected yourself. Then you need to take care of yourself. You need to take care of your family and whānau and your friends. Because if you start becoming a troublemaker to the extent that maybe we see happening, then maybe you're starting to hurt people as well as trying to help people. And that's where you start to think, well, what is the way that we can do this without hurting ourselves, hurting too many other people? This is kind of the nuclear option when it comes to troublemaking. When we see activists and activism happening, is that it goes right down to rioting. Now, I hope I don't get seen like this. I'm sure there are a few people at the university that kind of think, oh, Akon's on his march again. You know, he's going to cause more trouble for us or cause trouble elsewhere. And maybe they imagine me this way, but I don't really want to be seen this way. I don't believe in violence. I don't think violence is important for our world. I don't think violence necessarily solves a lot of things. I also appreciate that in different parts of the world and at different times, sometimes you need to fight violence with violence, the whole fight fire with fire. I tend to prefer to fight fire with water. And this idea that you can bring this level of pacificity, you know, not going out there and fighting back, but also showing love, showing araha in the face of danger, but doing it in a way that hopefully still affects change. You don't want to be seen as a pushover if you're trying to affect behavioral change or societal change, but you still don't want to be seen to be as bad as the people you're trying to fight. So how can we do this? And I think it's really pretty simple in my mind. The first thing that I believe you need to take away from any sort of activism, any sort of troublemaking that you want to get into, is you've got to get passionate. If you are not passionate, if you are not feeling passionate for something, then I encourage you to get passionate. I know what it's like to feel numb. I know what it's like to not feel love or hate or anything for something at that time. And I don't think that's a healthy place. We've been given emotions. We've been created with emotions for a reason. So get passionate, get excited about something. And passion doesn't need to be anger. You don't have to get angry at something. You could be passionate and be full of joy, full of love. Get passionate about something so much that you want to go and try and make the world a better place, make this thing change, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can start with a little thing, and I want to change that little part. The second thing I want to talk about, if you want to start these sorts of troublemaking or activism, is get educated and equipped. Do not walk into a battle. Do not walk into any sort of change situation ill-educated or ill-equipped and ill-resourced. Sometimes you need to learn more about that thing that you are passionate about. You need to go and read some more. You need to talk to people. You might need to get people to come around you and support you. It might mean joining a larger group and working together to go and fight something. So I remember, I think this must have been 2011, 2012. We had just moved to Canterbury and the National Front was in Christchurch at the time. The National Front is pretty much like your alt-right neo-Nazi group in New Zealand at the time. They will say not, they're not, but they're very, very passionate white supremacists, it seems. And they were doing a march on the purity of the white race or whatever else it might be in the city. And they gathered together as many people as they could to march with them. And surrounding them was a whole bunch of people opposing them. So if I'd gone on my own and stood up against the 20 or 30 people on my own, it'd be a pretty dangerous place to be. It would be a pretty dangerous place and would have got me into a lot of trouble. But when you are part of 200-300 people all saying, we don't agree with these guys, we don't agree with what they're standing for, suddenly you feel a lot safer. Now, the thing that I really took away from that as well is at the end of the National Front doing their march, a lot of the Sikh community got together and offered them to cook them lunch and say, hey, look, you guys have had your white supremacy march. Do you guys want to come and have lunch with us? We've got food. And I love that idea of fighting hate with love. And that was a really interesting way. I don't think they took them up on the offer, but it was still another way to do it. And so get educated, get equipped, learn about this, because it's going to make it much safer for you. Because if you walk into a battle, you walk into something you want to change, you don't know the facts or you aren't well resourced, you are going to be very vulnerable to attack. And finally, word of the day, know the consequences. Know the consequences of what is about to happen. And controversially, maybe know when to quit. When you're walking into something, if you don't know both the good and the bad of what could happen, even if everything goes right, even if you want to achieve the change you have set out to achieve, if you don't know the consequences that could happen as a result of it, then you get into trouble. And you probably aren't well educated or equipped to handle what's going to happen. So possibly the biggest trouble I've caused, in recent time anyway, was about 2014, where very lovely, the students voted me Lecturer of the Year for the College of Business Law. And it's a real heartwarming achievement to have won this award the students voted for, and it was really nice. Now, the same year, a club on campus held an event that really crossed the line in my mind. It was overtly racist, overtly sexist in my mind, and the student union who had given me the award didn't really take a hard line against that club. And they basically said, look, if you're going to have these events, then maybe don't put it on Facebook, because people get angry if they see you being racist and sexist. So don't put it on Facebook. And I said, that's kind of a terrible response. I think you should have actually sanctioned them. And so I'm standing here with an award in my hand from the student union, and then I'm standing here looking at what's happening with one of the clubs that they're meant to be managing or meant to be having kaitiaki responsibility for. And I went, I can't marry the two up. And so I gave my award back. And I said, I don't want to be seen to have benefited from a club that doesn't take racism and sexism seriously. And now I didn't just give my award back. I also wrote online why I gave my award back, apologized to the students that voted for me, and then I went off and taught. And when I came back, that post online had been viewed something like 2,000 times and shared about 500 times or something. It just blew up pretty quickly. I had hundreds of comments, both mostly positive, but a lot of people, a couple of people were a bit negative as well. And it was the starting point in what I feel for me was a real change in the role that I played at the university, and a real change for the University of Canterbury, when they realized that this sort of stuff they need to take seriously, because there's a groundswell of passion around this idea. So I knew going into this, when I thought, I'm going to hand this back, but I'm also going to publicly hand this back. I'm going to call out behavior. I'm going to cause trouble. I knew it might lead to some negative consequences. I knew that I would probably never win a student award again. And I won, I think, 5 awards in my first 4 years at the university from the students, and I haven't won one since. I could have turned into a terrible teacher overnight, and that's very possible. Or it could be that just other things are happening. I don't know. I also knew that some people would be angry at me. I didn't think I'd lose my job, and luckily I didn't. I believe there were a couple of people who were calling for me to be fired on the spot. But I kept my job. But I also knew it would cause trouble down the line as well. Maybe it would affect my chance to get promoted. Maybe it would affect my standing in the community. Maybe it would affect positively my standing in the community. I evaluated all of this before I did this, because if I wasn't sure of the consequences, then I would not be well equipped for handling the consequences when it happened. I think that's like 5 times I say consequences, Marcella. Is that enough? I'm not sure. But know the consequences. What I didn't realize, it's been what, about 6 or 7 years, I still get hate mail from a few people who are not happy with what I did. People will occasionally send me hate mail telling me to F off back to India or F off back to the UK or whatever else it might be, because they're not happy about the stance I took. Now, I didn't expect that, but it is part and parcel of what we have. So what I try to do is look at every situation, and I try to assign a traffic light system to it. Green means this thing is annoying me, but you know what? It's not the end of the world. I do not need to cause trouble on this. I will let this pass. Yellow is kind of, this is bugging me. I'm not really sure whether this is a big deal. I'm not going to let it pass just yet, but I'm not going to stand up just yet. I'm kind of evaluating it. Now, usually what I do now is if after 24 hours I'm still feeling some sort of angst, then I escalate things in my world, and I will say something about it, whether it's privately or publicly. Red means this is not okay and I need to intervene at this point. So there was another situation more recently where I was giving a talk at the city council. I used the word Pākehā, and a lady outside the council confronted me and called me a racist for using the word Pākehā, which for my friends in Australia, Pākehā is the te reo Māori word for a person of European descent. And she started to launch into a tirade of how racist I am. And I kind of said, no, you're wrong. I kind of tried to ignore it, but it was kind of a yellow thing. Anyway, a reporter overheard this, wrote a story about this. This became national news about whether the word Pākehā is a racist word or not. Luckily, it's not, apparently, but still some people are offended by it, and that's fine. Now, I never intended for that to become a red thing. I was trying to ignore it. The reporter actually called me before writing the article and said, "Were you offended by being called a racist?" And I think my literal words were, I've got a 13-year-old at home. That wasn't the most offensive thing I've heard today, let alone ever. You know, it's fine. I'm not worried by this. But clearly this was a story that he wants to run, and clearly it was big news because it made the national news. I caused trouble, and I didn't even know what was happening at the time, other than me saying, no, don't be a dick. It's not racist to say Pākehā. And then it kind of blew up. So just be careful with that. I want to finish there by just saying that you should cause trouble. If you want this world to be better, you should push the boundaries and try to get people to listen, to push forward and to cause trouble, but do it in a way that's safe. Think about the things, the consequences it has, not just on you, but the people around you. That whole issue with the Pākehā story, I realized it wasn't just affecting me. When my daughter came back from school, I think the next day, and said, I had to listen to you both in social studies and in English, and I hated it. So I had to listen to my dad. That's all my time. I need to stop now. I think Elizabeth is signaling that with her background. That's an amazing system. I didn't even think about that until I went red. I should have really known that. Oh, no, 15 minutes. I've actually got somewhere to be after this as well, so I'm not just late for myself, but I'm late for my next thing. Hit me, Bailey. Tell me why I suck. No, you're muted, mate.
We've got one more speaker, and then we'll come back to you. Now you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking, because we're recording this, do you think maybe you could give me the feedback and then we can end the recording so the next speaker doesn't get in the recording? I do know this. I know I need to run. Sorry. This is my own going late. Is that okay, Elizabeth? I know you're in charge. You're the Toastmaster.
We can go ahead and do that, Bailey, if you're ready.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Appreciate it.
Fantastic. So I will go straight into my recommendation for Ekant. First off, I really enjoyed the way he opened the speech with the Te Reo Māori intro to us today. It set the tone for the speech and gave us an idea of who he is as a person at his core and what values Ekant holds by using the Te Reo Māori introduction. Straight off the bat, I found Ekant's style of speaking to be very casual. So this allowed us as a listener to get behind what he was saying. It was informal. We didn't feel like he was talking at us. He was talking to us as this age group and this bracket. Ekant used some very effective visual aids throughout his speech, and this also set the tone. The first image with the bear, which he talked about, it allowed us to further understand where he was coming from and the overall tone of the speech. Another thing I really liked that Ekant did was his use of personal stories. He put personal stories throughout his presentation to reinforce the knowledge he was giving us. Like, he used the story of when he got the Lecturer of the Year award in 2014 and then passed it back. But he went further. He went into why he passed it back and then extrapolated the message from that story. So he used the story to reinforce knowledge. He also highlighted the point of change, which was really effective to further increase his argument of how we should go through the process and why we should cause trouble. I have some recommendations for Ekant. I found his pace to be very quick. In a lecture setting, it might have been okay, but via Zoom, it was a little bit difficult at times to completely follow what he was saying, and I know also time was an issue. My recommendation would be just to slow down on the important points to allow us to fully absorb those pieces of information. And my other recommendation is Ekant's use of filler words. I found there to be quite a few filler words, ahs, points where Eckhart could have taken a pause, but the filler word does slightly detract from the message. I think what Eckhart presented today was an incredibly well thought out piece of information. He gave us background info. He told us the how, which was very important. Get passionate, get educated, get equipped, and then know what the consequences are and know when to quit. And Eckhart supported these with evidence of his own personal stories to fully enforce his message, which was received very well. So through Eckhart's use of his easy listening style, his easy speaking style, his personal stories, Eckhart delivered to us today a very memorable presentation that I found thoroughly enjoyable. So thank you very much, Eckhart.
Thank you very much. No, very much appreciated. Marcella, how many ums and ahs did I do? I'm going to say 20.
Yeah, a bit more than that. No, so sorry. Thank you. I'll just summarize. You use filler words. You repeat them. You say or and or and. So I counted one for each one of those, and that's 35.
35. That's twice a minute. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. All right.
You
so
use
don't do that.
consequence. Sorry, you use consequence at least 6 times.
6 times.
So thank you for using the word of the day.
Sounds good. And completely not planned. Look, I'm really sorry to love you and leave you, team. Thank you for having me. I do need to get to another event, and hopefully those people who want to hang around, they can hang around to listen to the other talks. But thank you so much for having me. I'll leave you to it.